is CNN Breaking News.
Begin tonight keeping them honest, even as the White House tries to play hide and seek. For a second straight day, the president went to his golf course near Mar-a-Lago. Unlike yesterday, though, when we managed to get exclusive video of the president playing around instead of getting back to work as he promised, we got a very different view today. Apparently, in response to our footage, someone put a big truck between our camera, which was on public property, by the way, and the links. When we moved, the truck moved. The Secret Service says it wasn't behind us. The Palm Beach Sheriff's Department also denying responsibility. Now remember, during the campaign, Mr. Trump said he would not have time as president for golf. This was, however, the 87th day that he has spent at one of his own golf properties since taking office. The president did have at least one official function today, visiting a fire station in nearby West Palm Beach, where he talked about upcoming legislation for first responders and also boasted about his legislative accomplishments.
We have more legislation passed, including the record was Harry Truman a long time ago, and we broke that record, so we have a lot done.
Keeping them honest, again, the president has rolled back plenty of regulations, and of course he did sign a deal of executive orders, and he does have the tax bill to his credit. However, when it comes to the number of bills passed, the president is not, in fact, the best since Harry Truman. He is the worst, in fact, since Dwight Eisenhower, the worst in half a century. That said, he is trying for something big next year. CNN's Phil Mattingly joins me now with more. Phil, the president said today he broke that record for signing legislation. I mean, is there any way, any sort of technicality here where he could make that argument?
Yeah, Jim, the short answer is no. The 96 bills that he signed into law in his first year in office fall far short of his predecessors, going back to at least Dwight Eisenhower. But also, it's worth noting, it's an odd metric to fixate on, right? He has done things that are major accomplishments for conservatives. You can talk about the tax bill, which also repealed the Obamacare individual mandate, which also allowed drilling in the Anwar Reserve out in Alaska. He's got 12 circuit court judges, a Supreme Court justice that have all been confirmed. These are things that Republicans would like to focus on, not necessarily the numbers, particularly when they fall short. But by any metric you look at, Jim, if you want to talk about bills, and keep in mind, these aren't all major legislative initiatives for any president, let alone President Trump, by the sheer numbers, 96 bills that he's signed into law so far certainly don't measure up to his predecessors up to this point.
I mean, it raises the question, why bother when it's so easily refutable? Now, the president, of course, did have a major legislative achievement, the tax bill, as you mentioned, with a lot of things in there that have been Republican priorities. Looking ahead to next year, though, what are his big priorities, and will he need Democrats this time around with just a 51 vote majority in the Senate?
Yeah, he's definitely going to need Democrats, and I think that's why you're seeing White House officials now starting to focus on infrastructure. Look, for years, for multiple administrations, the idea of fixing bridges and roads and airports, LaGuardia, if you're Vice President Joe Biden, has been something that on the bipartisan level, at least on the top line, people agree to. And that's something, or agree should be done. And that's something the Trump administration has actually talked about for months. Behind the scenes, I'm told, top Trump aides have been meeting with Democrats on Capitol Hill. While it hasn't necessarily been fruitful in terms of legislation up to this point, they believe there's an opportunity there. Here's the rub. Right now, the Trump administration is focusing on about $200 billion in federal funding, hoping that they can lever that up to about $1 trillion with state and local funding as well. $200 billion is not enough for a lot of Democrats who think maybe $1 trillion should be a number, or right around there, that the federal government kicks in. And on the other side of things, conservatives say $200 billion in federal funding may be too much. So there's a line that the president and his team are going to have to walk if they try and push this forward. But it's worth noting, Jim, there are 10 Senate Democrats up for re-election in 2018 that come from states President Trump won. None of them came to the Republican side of the aisle throughout 2017, despite what I think a lot of people predicted. They are in play for something like infrastructure. The question is, can President Trump and his team and Republican leadership on Capitol Hill thread that needle on an issue that maybe on the top line everybody agrees to, but when you get into the weeds becomes significantly more difficult, Jim?
You know, those 2018 elections looming large.
This is CNN Breaking News.
With a former FBI and CIA senior official, that is Phil Mudd, and Matt Lewis of the Daily Beast. Matt, I want to begin with you because we had something of a conversation on this last night. But how do you reconcile Republicans' claims today that the FBI is biased against President Trump, and of course the Hillary Clinton camp that the FBI was biased against her in the email probe? Both those things can't be true.
Well, look, no, they probably can't be, except I would say two things. One, James Comey had promised Congress that if he found new information, that he would have to reopen the case. He was sort of bound to do it. It was going to come out eventually. And of course, it was very public. This Anthony Weiner's laptop had these emails on them from Huma Abedin. So that's one explanation. The other would be, frankly, by the time that James Comey in October comes forward and reopens the investigation into Hillary's campaign, I think we all assumed that Donald Trump was going to lose in a landslide, that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Now, I'm not saying, I don't frankly even believe this to be true, but if you're looking for a conspiracy theory, I think you could easily say, look, of course James Comey opened up that investigation. He never thought looking into Hillary was actually going to hurt her. Everybody assumed she was going to win.
Yeah, but that doesn't answer, Matt, what is the fundamental charge here from the president. He is alleging that the entire Bureau somehow, its leadership, is biased here, and of course some of his supporters go further to a deep state conspiracy extending to the intelligence agencies. It's not just about one person or one day or one revelation of a step in the investigation. They're making a much broader charge here.
Yeah, right, and I think it's unclear. I mean, it's unclear to me whether or not there's some bad apples in senior positions that have done some very questionable things, or whether there's something more systemic involved. I will say that today, I think, was a turning point. Up until now, it's been really Donald Trump and Trumpian sycophants who've been trying to delegitimize the FBI. I noticed today a couple examples of people who do not fit that description. One is James Gagliano, who is a CNN law enforcement analyst and a retired FBI agent, who wrote today that the president, along with innumerable others, are fairly alarmed at what may be occurring on the 7th floor executive suites in the FBI headquarters. He writes that changes need to be made at FBI headquarters. Okay. And the other is the CNN legal analyst, Paul Callan, who today really came down and said originally he thought the president's attacks on the FBI were wrong. He's looked into this, and, he told Poppy Harlow today, boy, there's some really disturbing stuff here.
Okay, you got a couple quotes there, no question. We have the advantage of having a live former FBI and CIA official here, Phil Bud. What's your view of all this?
This is pretty simple. Let's deal with facts and not with speculation. First of all, the 7th floor of the FBI is not critically involved in the investigation. The FBI director isn't. The deputy FBI director isn't. The special counsel is. He's the former FBI director. So don't tell me the 7th floor of the FBI is tainted. They're not conducting the investigation. Let me give you a couple facts if you want to argue that this is some sort of deep state Democratic conspiracy. Number one, a Trump nominee and appointee, the Deputy Attorney General, says that this is an appropriate investigation. He nominated a former Republican FBI director nominee, Robert Mueller, to run the investigation. That's 2 for 2 senior Republicans who say the investigation is appropriate. Four indictments have come out of this. 2 of those have resulted in guilty pleas from people who said, yes, not only did I do wrong, but I lied to the FBI. So we can have all this conversation about conspiracy at the FBI. But I'm going to say, if you think this is a bunch of Democrats conspiring, Republicans run the investigation. The FBI leadership doesn't, including the FBI director nominated by the President of the United States. And number 2, there are 4 indictments, 2 of which have already resulted in guilty pleas. What do you want?
Matt, how do you respond to that? I mean, the other point I would note, Robert Mueller himself, a lifetime Republican, and when Mueller was chosen, you'll remember that many Republicans were singing his praises.
Yeah, it's really hard to argue with that. And look, I'll tell you where I kind of come down on this. I think that very clearly President Trump is attempting to delegitimize this institution, and it's perfectly logical and obvious why he would want to do that. It would benefit him, in terms of this investigation looking into him. I do think, however, that the FBI and the Mueller investigation and the Clinton and Trump investigations have aided and abetted Donald Trump in this effort. I think that the FBI comes out of this looking really bad. The problem is there's so many examples. You've got the fact that so many people in this investigation contributed to Hillary Clinton. You've got the fact that McCabe's wife took hundreds of thousands of dollars from a Terry McAuliffe organization, and then he becomes.
If you listen to our lead-in, that was before McCabe was the deputy director, before he was in charge of the investigation.
I think that makes it worse. I think that makes it worse. Why would you promote somebody to be in this position of investigating if you knew their wife gave? If it was given like $700,000 by their best friend.
Well, let me ask Phil. Let me ask Phil, because
it looks really bad.
No, you made your point, and I want to make sure Phil gets in before we run out of time. Phil, you served. You're a CIA official, but you served in the FBI as well. I imagine there are people with party affiliations in those buildings, people who vote, people who have donated to campaigns, might even, be guilty of the sin of having a partner with different political views of their own than their own. Phil, in your experience, do folks separate those political leanings or leanings of their partners from the counterterror and legal work they have to do?
Well, I spent 4.5 years with Director Mueller, maybe 2,000 meetings. I never heard the dude make a political comment, ever. And let me ask a couple of simple, let's be clear, because I'll tell you where I stand, yes or no questions. If your spouse participates as a politician in an election, should you never be promoted in a federal government institution? Are you kidding me? What are you supposed to say? Sweetie, you cannot participate in the American democratic process. Secondly, if you're an investigator in a political investigation, are you supposed to certify that A, I either support President Trump, or B, I'm neutral? Is that how we do politics in America? I didn't realize that we had to have political certification before we participate in an investigation. And if that's the case, there should never be a congressional investigation, because every single one of them is a political partisan. So get out the Senate and get out the House in investigation, because they all contributed. Get them out.
Folks, we're going to have to leave it there, but I appreciate both of you taking part in a sane, reasoned conversation about this. Seriously. And we're going to keep it up. Phil Mudd, Matt Lewis, happy holidays to you and your families.
Thank you.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good evening, Jim Sciutto here, sitting in for Anderson and hoping you had a very nice holiday weekend. As for President Trump down at Mar-a-Lago, he signaled last evening that his holiday is over, tweeting, quote, "I hope everyone is having a great Christmas. Then tomorrow it's back to work in order to make America great again," which is happening faster than anyone anticipated, exclamation point. So this morning, he hit the links and had nothing on his public schedule for the rest of the day. More on that shortly. We begin, though, with a tweet he sent out this morning, and in a way, it did herald a return to work for him, namely his ongoing effort to discredit the Russia investigation in general. The FBI in particular, and a number of FBI officials by name, including one, Assistant Director Andrew McCabe, who he seems to be openly taunting. Here is the latest. Quote again, "Wow, Fox and Friends, dossier is bogus. Clinton campaign, DNC-funded dossier. FBI cannot, after all of this time, verify claims in dossier of Russia-Trump collusion. FBI tainted." And they use this crooked Hillary pile of garbage, I'm quoting again, as the basis for going after the Trump campaign. Again, another exclamation point. This is, as we know, becoming something of a refrain for the president.
Didn't she spend $12.4 million on a dossier that was a total phony? Right? I think it's very sad what they've done with this fake dossier. I think it's a disgrace. It's just really it's a very sad commentary on politics in this country.
When you look at that horrible dossier, which is a total phony, fake deal, like so much of the news that I read, when you look at that and take a look at what's gone on with that and the kind of money we're talking about, it is a disgrace.
Now, the president is referring to the Steele dossier and keeping them honest tonight. Some of what he is saying on camera and Twitter is incomplete, misleading, and out and out false. The dossier, as you know, is a collection of research compiled by a former British intelligence officer, Christopher Steele, for a firm called Fusion GPS. And yes, Fusion was paid by the DNC and the Clinton campaign for its work. But it was initially hired during the primaries by one of candidate Trump's Republican opponents. It details alleged Russian efforts to help the Trump campaign and includes salacious and unsubstantiated details, which CNN is not and has never reported. However, keeping them honest again, both in general and particular, based on our own reporting and word from numerous official sources, the dossier in fact, is far from bogus, as the president claims. In fact, U.S. investigators have corroborated portions of the dossier, specifically that some of the meetings and conversations detailed in the dossier took place on the dates and in the places as described. Still, the dossier was not, as the president suggests, the central basis for going after his campaign. He seems to be conflating it with, or blaming it for, the entire suite of Russia probes. The special counsel has his own investigation, and before that, so did the FBI, as did their broader intelligence community, which was piling up evidence of Russian meddling on its own. And of the 4 people so far charged, none of the court documents mention the dossier at all. More broadly, the most central question, whether Trump associates colluded or cooperated with Russians, is still not closed, neither by Special Counsel Mueller nor the relevant congressional committees. And throughout the year, again, using numerous sources, CNN has been reporting on precisely how the dossier does and does not square with the facts as we know them about an alleged campaign contact with Russians, intelligence intercepts of Russian officials talking among themselves, how the dossier is being used by investigators, and more. To simply call it bogus, as the president did again today, is to call the work of so many intelligence, counterintelligence, and other career public servants bogus. To call the FBI tainted or in tatters and target of one of its top officials by name, well, that's for the panel to discuss and you to decide. More tweets from the president and more claims based on the fact that the very unfair and unpopular individual mandate has been terminated as part of our tax cut bill, which essentially repeals, over time, Obamacare. The Democrats and Republicans will eventually come together and develop a great new health care plan, exclamation part. The last part remains to be seen. As for repealing Obamacare, keeping them honest, it doesn't. It leaves intact subsidies for millions of Americans, keeps mandates on what must be covered, keeps Medicaid expansion, and more. Joining me now is former Trump campaign aide Michael Caputo and CNN political commentator Bakari Sellers. Bakari, to start with, repealing Obamacare, obviously a big campaign promise for President Trump. Has he pulled it off or partially pulled it off, in your view, with this bill?
No, I mean, in no one's view has he pulled that off. In fact, the Republicans, with control of the White House, with control of both the House and Senate, have royally failed on that campaign promise, and thank God many Americans depend on this, need this, and in fact many of the people who are new enrollees into Obamacare actually live in Trump states. But let's talk about what the individual mandate does, because it's very clear that the President of the United States doesn't even know what Obamacare is. It's actually less than 3% of the total cost of Obamacare. Even more specifically, it only deals with the people on the individual markets, which only encompass about 7% of the people who are covered by Obamacare. The fact of the matter is that you have more individuals who are covered through Medicaid expansion. You still have the subsidies in place. You still have those, as you called them, the necessities that have to be covered by insurance companies, also known as pre-existing conditions. We still have the fundamental tenets of Obamacare. But I will tell you this, Democrats understand that Obamacare needs to be fixed. We understand that markets need to be stabilized. And while the White House wants to sabotage Obamacare, I'm hopeful that there will be a bipartisan fix with Murray Alexander that comes sooner rather than later to help reverse the sabotaging that this White House is doing, not just Donald Trump, but also Mick Mulvaney.
I do want to get to that Murray plan, but Michael, what do you say to that? I've spoken to Republicans who say that in reality it is more of a strategy of taking it apart piece by piece. Is that what we're seeing here with the taking away of the mandate?
And I think that's what the president meant when he said over time. I mean, this is, while it might not be the largest share of the funding of or the expense of Obamacare, it is a very important pole in this tent. And there are Republicans and opponents to Obamacare across the board who think that this might cause fundamental, damage to the program, that over time it falls apart. But of course, we just saw a fairly a robust sign-up period for Obamacare this past time around. In fact, my family and I were forced to sign up for this abomination again last Friday or 2 Fridays ago. From the very beginning, our deductible went up 10 times, and our price keeps going up 30, 40% each year. But what we do have here is 13 million people who will not be forced to buy something that they don't think they need. I just spent a little bit of time with a friend of mine who's in the construction trades. He feels he's healthy enough and doesn't want to pay for health care, and he believes that if it's not this year, next year, the president just put $1,300 back into his pocket, and that matters to him.
Bakari, how do you respond? Because, I mean, part of this issue here, is it not that you need healthy people and sick people to sign up? Because that's kind of the way insurance works. Because if it's all sick older people, right, you know, you don't have enough money in the system to pay for them.
I mean, but just listening to that argument, I mean, it's why Democrats are winning elections now. I mean, really, we don't have a clear message, but Michael actually helps us make our message. There are two reasons. One is the policy reason. The fact is, when you actually eliminate this individual mandate, he's complaining about his prices and where they are. Well, guess what? They're going to go up. You know why? Because fewer people are going to be a part of the pool. That's fundamentally how insurance works.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Robert Mueller's team is preparing to interview President Trump's private lawyers, but it's also been forced to defend itself against new attacks from members of the Trump transition team, Republican lawyers, and the conservative media.
At issue here is tens of thousands of emails sent by members of the transition team. The transition team's lawyers say Mueller got those emails illegally and argue that the documents should have been protected.
But the special counsel's office says it has followed the proper legal channels, and legal experts say the emails are fair game because they were sent from government accounts. CNN's Boris Sanchez explains how this latest round of attacks will affect the investigation moving forward.
This story just adds another layer on what has been a barrage of attacks on the special counsel from Republicans, some Republicans who are making the case that Robert Mueller should resign after news broke several days ago that there had been messages exchanged between top FBI officials back in 2016 during the campaign that were critical of then candidate Donald Trump. Republicans made the case that those two officials that had since been on the special counsel team had tainted the investigation, so to speak. One of those officials actually left the special counsel before the text messages were revealed. One of them was reassigned shortly after those messages came to light. But again, many Republicans are making the case that the messages reveal partisanship within the investigation, and they've argued that Robert Mueller should resign. Democrats, in response, have made the case that the special counsel is not partisan, that it remains politically independent, though they are speculating that the president is now planning to fire Robert Mueller. Two Democrats, both on the House Intelligence Committee, made the case this weekend that that was the case. First, Adam Schiff, who was on Twitter saying that he believed that the firing of Robert Mueller would happen before the end of the year. The other, Jackie Spear, also made the case to a San Francisco TV station that Robert Mueller's firing was imminent. CNN reached out to White House attorney Ty Cobb for a statement on these remarks, and he gave us a statement writing in part, quote, "As the White House has consistently said for months, there is no consideration of firing the special counsel." So you have the White House denying that there is any kind of plan to remove Robert Mueller as the head of the special counsel. You have some Democrats that are saying that that is the case, that his firing is imminent. And then you have certain Republicans that are saying that the special counsel is tainted and that Robert Mueller should indeed resign. A complicated situation, and one that likely will receive greater focus because as early as this week, you have a White House legal team meeting with Robert Mueller one-on-one, potentially to discuss the next steps in this investigation. Boris Sanchez, CNN at the White House.
All right, here now, CNN political commentators Errol Lewis and Andre Bauer, and CNN political analyst Julian Zelizer as well. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so let's start here with the claim that these emails, tens of thousands of documents, were unlawfully produced by the GSA. Julian, these are government accounts, right?
Yeah, it seems from the stories that the GSA voluntarily shared the information with the investigators. So at this moment, there's no reason to suspect anything wrong was done. I see this as part of a broader attack from the administration on the legitimacy of the investigation.
So let me come to you, Andre, and I want to read for you a tweet from Norm Eisen, the former ethics czar for the Obama White House. And he also was, as he writes here in this tweet, the deputy general counsel of a transition, Obama-Biden 08. I warned everyone there is no expectation of privacy in your transition emails. The clue, emails are name@ptt.gov. The whining letter from the Trump transition tactically admits this. It ends by asking for a legislative fix. You've been part of a transition to the executive branch when you were the lieutenant governor under Mark Sanford in South Carolina. You knew that your emails were government property, did you not? And if there was some investigation, they could be retrieved through a government agency, correct?
I did. But I would say this, Victor. What the American people want to have is they want to feel like there is a conflict of interest-free investigation. And if people aren't going through the right channels to do that, then people say, well, you know, there's already so much of a cloud over this. It looks like most of the people investigated donated to either President Obama or Secretary Clinton.
Hold on. I want to give you time to finish this answer, but for the scope of this letter that went from the attorney for Trump for America to these congressional committees, you acknowledge that these documents were not unlawfully obtained, correct? And that
I don't because I don't know the particulars of how they were obtained. I'm sure they can go through a legal channel to obtain them through the correct manner, and that may be what they should have done.
Are you suggesting that they didn't? I mean, if you say if that's what they should have done, then you're suggesting that maybe they did not.
Well, Victor, I don't know the particulars of it. What I'm more of the big picture is look, they're fair game. They may be a different channel by which they need to obtain these. But overall, what people, well, not everybody, but a lot of people feel like this is a one-sided investigation. Why isn't Hillary being investigated to her ties as Russia as well? Because you don't just, in NASCAR, for example, you don't just inspect
This ain't NASCAR, Andre. It ain't NASCAR. This is a federal investigation, and you've got a prosecutor here who's going through a government service agency, that office, administration rather, to get the documents.
But Victor, you don't think that Hillary Clinton should be investigated too with her ties to Russia?
Andre,
I mean, the fact that she got hundreds of millions of dollars from Russians and now she gets nothing?
You knew the exact topic we invited you here to discuss. It was this letter from Trump for America to the congressional committees, and every time you're on, you transition it back to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is not the president of the United States, and right now she's not under federal investigation. That's what we're talking about this morning. Errol, let me come to you.
Me about investigation, and I tell you that a conflict of interest investigation includes everything on the table, not just a one-sided investigation.
Okay. So, Errol, let me come to you. And this is what we're hearing from conservative media, and we'll have this conversation with Brian Stelter a little later. This echo chamber from the White House to, most often, the studios of Fox News in New York, back and forth, and conservative media broadly trying to continue to discredit the Mueller investigation by trying to discredit the investigators, but also to shut it all down together.
Well, that's right. Part of what seems to be a transparent effort to sort of undermine the investigation by making it seem as if, well, there's some sort of conflict. Something wasn't done right. The people may have actually given a political donation at some point in their life, and on and on and on. I mean, in this particular case, it's important to keep in mind that what's being offered here is that perhaps the transition materials were improperly given to the Mueller investigation, and they're saying it's protected by attorney-client privilege. One thing to keep in mind, and it's very rare to hear the special counsel actually explain any of this, but they said, look, we did everything pursuant to the permission of the writers of the emails or pursuant to criminal process, which to my ear sounds like what they're saying is you don't have you can't assert attorney-client privilege to do something that is unlawful. That defeats the privilege. So if you say, you know, if I were to say to you, Victor, you're my lawyer, I plan to do something illegal, why don't you help me figure out how to do it? You can't run back later and say, this is all protected by attorney-client privilege. So, you know, at some point we should really talk about the truth, not the politics of the situation, not whether or not Hillary Clinton got a pass 2 years ago or anything like that. We should really talk about the facts of the matter, and that's what we should all be waiting for the special counsel to reveal to us.
Julian,
But this
I want to talk.
investigation is supposed to be
Hold on, Andre. We're going to come back to you. I'll get back to Julian, and I'll come right back to you after that. We're going in order here. There was a response here from a spokesman for the special counsel, which is very rare to hear from him. He's not responded to any of the criticism thus far. Let's put up on the screen what Mr. Carr said. When we have obtained emails in the course of our ongoing criminal investigation, we have secured either the account owner's consent or appropriate criminal process. They're defending how they got these emails. Just to give us some context here on the rarity of hearing from a spokesman for Special Counsel Mueller.
Yeah, we haven't heard much from him at all. He's been very careful to remain quiet, not to have his spokesman out front. In part, this is because Mueller is extraordinarily cautious, actually, in how he conducts investigations. It's the opposite of what administration spokespeople tend to be saying right now. But I think that the special counsel feels that his office right now is under systematic attack, which it is. And so my guess is this is an effort in a very important week, probably, in terms of how the administration is going to handle this investigation, to explain clearly that nothing wrong was done on their part. They don't believe that this is protected material, and they went through the proper channels to obtain the material. As Errol said, this is a very transparent effort. That's why all of a sudden we're talking about Hillary Clinton right now in the panel. And so I think the special counsel feels that they have to be a little political right now, meaning not political for one side or the other, but to protect the integrity of the investigation from the President of the United States and his allies.
Andre, do you think Special Counsel Mueller should be fired?
No, but I do think that it is more than fair to raise questions about people who are on his team that have only donated to one side, that have been involved in Fusion GPS, whose wives have been paid for them. All those are conflicts of interest. And all those are important when building the trust of the American people, because the whole reason you have special counsel is to make sure there are no conflicts of interest, and they're all over the place in this investigation.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Tonight, though, we are keeping them honest with new reporting of what seems to be an alternate reality for the president, a reality where he sees no security threat of Russian election meddling, no political threat from Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. In fact, no R word altogether inside the White House at times, because some aides are reportedly scared to bring it up, which wouldn't matter except for the fact that intelligence officials say there is every reason to believe the Russians will try to do this again. The president is telling friends he's expecting something of a Christmas miracle in the Russia probe. This is according to new exclusive reporting from CNN's Sarah Murray, Jeremy Diamond, and Manu Raju. According to multiple sources, the president is insisting not only that he's going to be exonerated and soon, but also that special counsel Robert Mueller is going to write a letter clearing him of any wrongdoing that he can wave around as proof that he didn't do anything wrong. A Christmas miracle. Now, keeping them honest, there's no indication from Mueller or his team that they believe in miracles or that the investigation is in its final stages. Only Mueller and his team know for sure, but some legal experts say the investigation might actually be ramping up with Michael Flynn's guilty plea and cooperation. As to the best Christmas card ever, this magical letter of exoneration, it's unclear where that idea even comes from. The real problem, though, according to one source, is that if the president doesn't get what he wants for Christmas or soon thereafter, if this letter doesn't come, that he will have some kind of meltdown. That is a direct quote from a source in the piece. A longtime friend of the president says he thinks his attorneys have lulled him into a false sense of security and unrealistic expectations, which could backfire spectacularly, but have now made the president less agitated. Take a look at what the president said yesterday about tens of thousands of Trump transition team emails that Mueller's team had obtained, the president's lawyers say unlawfully, which Mueller's team denies.
Not looking good. It's not looking good. It's quite sad to see that. So my people were very upset about it. I can't imagine there's anything on them, frankly, because as we said, there's no collusion. There's no collusion whatsoever. But a lot of lawyers thought that was pretty sad.
Do you still be integrity firing?
No, I'm not.
We'll have more on those emails later in the program, but as to the last part, not planning to fire Mueller, one source predicts if the president doesn't get this exoneration letter, again, a letter that seems to exist only in his own mind, that he will fire Mueller, which would leave him vulnerable to impeachment. On Friday, the president said lawmakers need to get back to running the country.
Let's put it this way. There is absolutely no collusion. That has been proven.
Keeping them honest, that hasn't been proven. It might be eventually, but it hasn't been proven yet. The Mueller investigation is not over, no matter how many times the president repeats himself. The fact is, it's not over, and we know the president likes to repeat himself on this issue.
The Russia story is a total fabrication. It's just an excuse for the greatest loss in the history of American politics. Russia is a ruse. There is no collusion. You know why? Because I don't speak to Russians. This Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. The entire thing has been a witch hunt. Look, there has been no obstruction. There has been no collusion. All I can tell you is this. There was no collusion. There was no nothing.
Here is more of what the president said Friday.
Let's put it this way. There is absolutely no collusion. That has been proven. When you look at the committees, whether it's the Senate or the House, everybody, my worst enemies, they walk out, they say, there is no collusion, but we'll continue to look.
Now, on those congressional investigations, the new reporting from Sarah Murray, Manu Raju, and Jeremy Diamond is that several members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have made a conscious effort to avoid the president and the White House to guard against allegations of impropriety. Meanwhile, other lawmakers are avoiding discussing Russia with the president. Sources say in a call with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in August, the president railed about the ongoing investigations, and the two have steered clear of the topic since then. Senator Lindsey Graham says he tries to avoid talking Russia on the golf course with the president because the president will just complain about it and say he didn't do anything wrong. Now, this all tracks with what the Washington Post reported last week, that the president's daily briefing is structured in a way to avoid upsetting him, because if anyone brings up Russia, it takes it off the rails. So there are people around the president telling him what he wants to hear, others not bringing up the country that attacked American democracy because it will make him mad. And he has yet to even have one cabinet-level meeting on Russian interference or what to do about it. And now that the president is expecting a letter of exoneration from Mueller to come soon, it may have created an artificial calm with some of those around him concerned about an impending storm. Much like a letter, we'll keep you posted.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We begin tonight with the president saying today that the Russia investigations are a form of mania cooked up by President Trump's opponents in an effort to undermine him. But it wasn't President Trump who said that. It was Russian President Vladimir Putin in his annual end-of-the-year press conference in Moscow. Putin praised President Trump, saying he has made a number of fairly serious achievements, and Putin called the Russia investigations delirium and madness.
This is all dreamed up by people who are in opposition to Trump, so as to make sure that everybody thinks that what he's doing, what he's working at, is illegitimate.
As you know, United States intelligence agencies are unanimous in this conclusion that Russia launched an unprecedented attack on the American electoral process during the 2016 presidential campaign and are almost certainly going to try to do it again. A clear threat to national security and American democracy, something the leader of a country under attack surely would want to address. But tonight there's new reporting from the Washington Post that says not only does President Trump continue to reject evidence of Russia meddling to support him, he doesn't even want to hear about it. According to the Washington Post, current and former officials say the president's daily brief is, quote, often structured to avoid upsetting him with intelligence related to Russia, sometimes just in the written assessment not brought up in the room. One former senior intelligence official told the Post that if you talk about Russia's meddling, it takes the briefing off the rails. Now, consider the implications of that for just a second. The people who briefed the President of the United States about a direct attack on this country have to be careful about what they say about the country that did it, because it will upset President Trump. Now, again, the meddling in this election isn't some conspiracy theory. All of the U.S. intelligence agencies say that it happened. So considering that and this new Washington Post reporting, it is worth looking again at what President Trump said to reporters last month after meeting with Putin. Quote, I just asked him again. He said he absolutely did not meddle in our election. He did not do what they are saying he did. He also said, every time he sees me, he says, I didn't do that. And I really believe that when he tells me that. He means it. But he says, I didn't do that. I think he's very insulted by it, if you want to know the truth. Now, one could take that as the President of the United States being more concerned with the feelings of Russia's president than the integrity of his own country's elections, but it's kind of a challenge to get a read on what the president meant, because listen to what he said the very next day. Now, keep in mind that this comment came, his first comment set off a firestorm of controversy, so this next comment came after that and has more than a whiff of damage control.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies. I've worked with them very strongly.
So, to be fair, that last statement does sort of track with what he said just about a year ago, just after he was elected, but with a caveat. First, here's that statement.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people.
Well, the new reporting in the Washington Post says the president immediately regretted saying what you just heard him say. His inner circle, according to the Post reporting, had been pleading with him to acknowledge Russia's interference in the election. But after he said that, January 11th, he reportedly told aides, quote, "It's not me, it wasn't right." In May, intelligence leaders testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee.
As the assembled leadership of the intelligence community, do you believe that the January 2017 intelligence community assessment accurately characterized the extent of Russian activities in the 2016 election and its conclusion that Russian intelligence agencies were responsible for the hacking and leaking of information and using misinformation in order to influence our elections? Simple yes or no would suffice.
I do. Yes, sir. Yes, Senator.
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yes.
It's been 7 months since those 6 yeses. Administration officials tell the Washington Post the president has never convened a cabinet meeting about Russian interference or what to do about it. Never. Not once. One former high-ranking Trump administration official tells the Post there's an unspoken understanding of the National Security Council not to raise the issue because that would acknowledge its validity, which the president would take as an affront. Keeping him honest, a threat to national security should trump one man's feelings, even if, especially if, that man is the President of the United States.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We begin tonight, keeping him honest, with the president for the first time leaving open the possibility of pardoning the first person inside his administration to be charged in the special counsel's Russia investigation. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, as you know, pleaded guilty of lying to the FBI about conversations with Russia's ambassador. He's now cooperating with Robert Mueller's investigation. Today on the White House South Lawn, the president was asked whether he would consider pardoning Flynn. Here's what he said.
I don't want to talk about pardons for Michael Flynn yet. We'll see what happens. Let's see.
We'll see, let's see, is among the president's favorite phrase. A vague cliffhanger he's used to talk about the fate of everything from the Paris Climate Accord to war with North Korea. Now, we'll see could suggest there is consideration being given to pardoning Michael Flynn. We'll see could be a message to Flynn that no matter what Mueller threatens him with, he can still be bailed out. It's the first time the president has opened the door to the possibility of pardon, which of course set off a lot of alarm bells, though attempting to tamp the whole thing down. White House attorney Ty Cobb said this in a statement a bit later after the president's remarks. Quote, "There is no consideration being given to pardoning Michael Flynn at the White House." That's what we call a walk back, and it's in keeping with what Sarah Sanders said about whether a Flynn pardon was on the table 10 days ago.
Would he consider pardoning him?
I'm not aware of that has come up or any process or decision on that front.
So that's, you haven't talked to him about it, or
no? I haven't asked. I haven't asked the president whether or not he would do that.
You have not. Could you
I think before we start discussing the pardons for individuals, we should see, what happens in specific cases too.
So is it fair to say it's on the table?
No, I just said I haven't had the conversation with him because I don't feel that it's necessary until you get further down the road and determine whether or not that's even something needed.
As I said, that's pretty close to Ty Cobb's statement that a pardon isn't something being considered. Now, either the president is saying something that's not true, or it's true and he hasn't told some of his closest advisors about it, or maybe those advisors know it's being considered by him and they're not telling the truth in their statements. None of those are great options, at least if you're one of those people interested in getting the facts. But frankly, the mixed messaging on things like this from the White House, it's not anything new. Let's go back to the firing of FBI Director James Comey. Here's what the president said in April.
Is it too late now to ask him to step down?
No, it's not too late, but, I have confidence in him. We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Less than a month later, on May 9th, then Press Secretary Sean Spicer had this exchange at the press briefing.
Does the president still have confidence, full confidence in FBI Director James Comey?
I have no reason to believe. I haven't asked him, so I have not asked the president since the last time we spoke about this.
And the last time you spoke about it, you said he did have confidence, but you're not sure to say that again now?
Well, I don't, in light of what you're telling me, I don't want to start speaking on behalf of the president without speaking to him first.
Now, that was a good call because Comey was fired hours after that press briefing. Steve Bannon also got a "we'll see" from the president. In August, the president was asked if he still had confidence in Bannon.
Well, we'll see. And look, I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist, I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon.
We'll see what happens. Bannon, by the way, was out 3 days later, but his fingerprints, of course, remain, and he figures into the president's remarks today in other ways as well. A super PAC aligned with him, a group called Great America Alliance, has been running an ad in local cable markets calling for members of Robert Mueller's team to be fired. The ad features a Fox News commentator, and it fits right in with the campaign Fox News has been on to try to discredit the Mueller investigation, a campaign that the president is, of course, fully on board with. Here's a longer version of what the president said about Flynn today.
I don't want to talk about pardons for Michael Flynn yet. We'll see what happens. Let's see. I can say this. When you look at what's gone on with the FBI and with the Justice Department, people are very, very angry.
Now, one can assume that the very, very angry people the president is talking about are himself, Sean Hannity, and other Fox News anchors who've been on a campaign against the Mueller investigation, which is fine. The president can watch whatever TV programs he wants. But he probably should also be getting intelligence briefings about Russia's interference in the election, or perhaps holding a cabinet meeting or two about that interference. And the recent reporting in the Washington Post says that doesn't happen, because if someone tries to talk about that particular attack on American democracy, it upsets the president and takes the briefing off the rails. So just think about that for a moment. The daily briefings are structured to avoid upsetting a president who deems anything that he doesn't like fake news and anything Russia-related an effort to delegitimize him. Nothing, it seems, can break his feedback loop with Fox News talking points. Certainly not intelligence he refuses to hear and facts he refuses to accept.
Full-throated pushback in the Russia investigation, attacks on special counsel Mueller, attacks on the FBI and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Now add the president's eldest son and namesake to that list, Donald Trump Jr. This evening in West Palm Beach, referring to those FBI personal texts, the Steele dossier, and slamming what he seems to think is a double standard where his father is concerned.
Imagine what would happen if we roll back the clock to 2008 and a conservative director of the FBI and high up people in the FBI that were leading all these investigations wrote an email about an insurance policy, the dossier, in the unlikely event that Barack Obama was elected president. What do you think would happen? Do you think the media would cover that? Yeah. Do you think it would be brushed under the rug like, oh, it's nothing, it doesn't mean anything? There'd be revolution in the streets. So I'm glad that this is coming out now because it is good, because real people have to see this. You know, my father talked about a rigged system throughout the campaign, and people are, oh, what are you talking about? But it is, and you're seeing it. There is, and there are people at the highest levels of government that don't want to let America be America.
People who don't want to let America be America. Joining us now, Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. What's your reaction to what Donald Trump Jr. just said?
Well, he apparently forgets the fact that in real time what happened last year was the director of the FBI talked about an investigation into Hillary Clinton even 10 days or less before an election, but did not tell the country that there was also an investigation going on of the Trump campaign over a far more serious matter. That is whether individuals of the Trump campaign had been suborned essentially as agents of a foreign power. So for the most consequential difference between how these investigations were handled, it cut very much in Donald Trump's favor. And that seems to be something that Donald Trump Jr. would rather ignore.
He says there are people who don't want to let America be America, suggesting there's some kind of conspiracy, perhaps, to undermine his father's administration. Is there any conspiracy like that?
No, but you have to realize this is, I guess, a Trump family characteristic, and that is to always view themselves as the victim of something, victim of a rigged system, victim of an unfair FBI, victim of unfair press coverage. This seems to be a genetic trait. But the reality is that I think our FBI and our Department of Justice have a lot of really dedicated public servants whose work is being maligned right now because there's an effort to tear down those institutions, to tear down what Bob Mueller may find, to discredit it in advance by casting doubt on the integrity of these institutions. In the meantime, of course, they do enormous damage to our democracy and undermine public confidence in the administration of justice.
Trying to undermine Robert Mueller's investigation. There are questions that you've raised about whether the Republicans, in a way, trying to undermine what's going on, even in the House Intelligence Committee. You have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today where you say you've made progress, but you also say Republican members have posed challenges. Explain that.
Well, there are a number of steps the Republicans are taking which don't make sense from an investigative point of view, and they're a departure from how we have operated in the past. Probably the most graphic example, they've scheduled key interviews out of state, including one tomorrow, when we have another vote on the tax bill, and we have a vote potentially tomorrow to keep the government open. So why would they be scheduling interviews out of state if they simply didn't want us to be present during the interviews? Now, these are interviews with witnesses that we've been asking them to bring in for months, and they've sat on. So what is the headlong rush to do it now, if not to try to end the investigation? And that's my fear. We saw on display in the Judiciary Committee last week an effort to discredit Mueller, discredit the FBI, discredit the Justice Department, to shut down Mueller. We're seeing in our committee, in the Intelligence Committee, an effort to bring the congressional investigation to a premature conclusion, and that ought to concern all Americans who want to get to the truth.
Is this something that either the chairman of the committee, Devin Nunes, who I know isn't involved with the Russia investigation, or Mike Conaway, who is running the Russia investigation for a committee, have either of them said to you that they are trying to shut this down soon?
Well, they've been, I think, fairly vague when I ask, why are we scheduling witnesses 3 a day when it took months for you to schedule some of the witnesses we've asked for a long time ago? Why don't we have these witnesses that you're scheduling out of state come before our committee after the holidays? Why are we not scheduling any interviews for the new year when there are dozens of interviews to be scheduled? I can't get an answer, and that tells me that there may very well be marching orders from the top that they got to bring this to an end. And we have seen Steve Bannon, the president, and others amp up the heat on Congress to shut us down. Now, the Republican senators have acknowledged the president weighed in with them to try to get them to shut down their investigation. The House members have not been willing to comment about whether they've received similar pressure from the White House, but they certainly seem to be acting that way.
They're acting like they're being pressured from the White House. I want to play you something that we heard from the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. Obviously, the entire Russia investigation, at its core, is a question about whether Russia tried to influence the election, whether Russia has undue influence on the Trump campaign and maybe at the beginning stages of the Trump presidency. This is what former DNI Clapper said about phone calls between Vladimir Putin and President Trump over the weekend.
I think this past weekend is illustrative of what a great case officer Vladimir Putin is. He knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president.
Do you think President Trump is an asset to Vladimir Putin? He's treating him like some kind of intelligence asset?
Well, I think the president is allowing himself to be manipulated by Putin. Putin knows, because the Kremlin does a psychological profile, I'm sure, of world leaders, what the president's strengths and weaknesses are, and knows, because this is sort of in plain sight, that flattery will get you just about everything with this president. And so in his year-end comments, Vladimir Putin talks about how great the American economy is. And why are some people in the United States questioning the legitimacy of his election when, of course, the Russians would never interfere in our affairs? These are talking points that could have been written by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But the president of Russia, Putin, understands how to push this president's buttons, how to get this president to do effectively his bidding, and praise is the way to do it. And so in that respect, it is a bit like the relationship between a case officer and asset. You need to know the motivations of your asset, what will get the asset to do the things you want. I wouldn't push that analogy too far, but the reality is, I think Putin is using all of the tactics you would expect him to use. The only surprising thing is how well they seem to work with the president.
Congressman Adam Schiff, we know you have an unexpected tax vote tomorrow morning, so we'll let you go and get some sleep here. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, speaking of buttons and pushing and presidential psychology, today on Twitter, the president took on the Washington Post with another claim of fake news. The report in question that the president considered putting Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court over his private criticisms of the president's attack on the judiciary. I'll talk this over with Maggie Haberman next. So this morning, the president tweeted yet again that a story he didn't like in the Washington Post was fake news. This is the tweet in question. He says, a story in the Washington Post that I was close to rescinding the nomination of Justice Gorsuch prior to confirmation is fake news. I never even wavered, and I'm very proud of him and the job he is doing as a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. The unnamed sources don't exist. Well, the Washington Post reported the president was so angry with Neil Gorsuch after he privately criticized the president's attacks on the judiciary that he considered withdrawing the nomination altogether. The report said he was venting angrily, the president was, to advisors, worrying that Gorsuch would not be, quote, loyal. That's the key word here. CNN political analyst, New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman joins me right now. And Maggie, that's the bigger issue here. We know that loyalty is something that is of the utmost importance to this president.
Right. Look, I mean, especially to the issue of his tweet that the sources don't exist. I've worked with two of these reporters. I'm confident the sources exist. Right. And this is often what he says is people aren't actually real. Look, this is, as you say, on its own, we knew at the time that he was unhappy with what Neil Gorsuch had said and what leaked out about what he had said. We knew the president was frustrated. This takes it a tick further, but I think your point that there is a larger issue of how the president views relationships, right? Everything is sort of this one-way street of loyalty toward him. I mean, the way he views loyalty isn't even that, he'll be loyal back because he gets rid of people all the time. It's that he expects people to pay some sort of unending price if he gives them something. And this is where he conflates himself with the institution he serves. Making an appointment for a Supreme Court justice is certainly something that I suspect justices feel gratitude toward the president who does it. But it is not supposed to be something where you have some personal fealty. He was actually preserving the institution, Neil Gorsuch, by saying what he said. And the president just can't see it that way. We heard this word loyalty come up repeatedly in the campaign. We've heard it come up repeatedly in the presidency. My colleagues and I heard about it when the president was looking for a replacement for James Comey, the fired FBI director. He asked people about potential replacements. Will this person be loyal? That was the word. He clearly views Jeff Sessions' recusal, the attorney general from the Russia-related probes, as disloyal to him. He described it as unfair to the president in an interview with me and my colleagues over the summer. But this is the continuum on which this all exists.
It's curious to me, though, because if Jeff Sessions is not loyal enough, James Comey obviously wasn't and got fired. But Rex Tillerson reportedly called him a moron. Right? Gary Cohn criticized him quite publicly for the Charlottesville speech. I don't consider those to be acts of blind loyalty necessarily, yet those guys are still around.
Well, I think let's get together again in February and see if those guys are still around. I mean, in all seriousness, look, the relationship with Tillerson has never been good, or at least it was good very early on for a limited amount of time, and then I think it was not very good. The relationship with Gary Cohn has never repaired, and did Gary Cohn get the job that he wanted, which was the Fed chair? He did not. So, I mean, I just think that these things have some nuance and gradation. I think it was important to John Kelly, the chief of staff, to keep a continuum of top advisors in cabinet positions filled through the first year. I think that once we get past the first year, you will see some change. I think the president is aware that he can't just get rid of everybody. And again, to be clear, he didn't pull back the nomination of Neil Gorsuch.
Correct.
He vented about it to somebody. He vents all the time about all manner of things. Part of this, the asking people questions about whether he should have done something, sometimes it's venting, sometimes it's just how he processes something. Sometimes he actually is thinking of undoing what he did, and you almost never know exactly what he's thinking.
Which is why you get all the kinds of rumors that have been going around for months about Robert Mueller and whatnot.
Correct.
These discussions may very well be happening.
Correct.
He may not mean, going to the full extent on them or not. We are at a key point in this presidency right now. It's almost the end of 2017. He's going to get this tax bill through. He will sign his first major piece of legislation. And one could reasonably ask the question, well, Is this a pivot point? Is this a chance for the president to change how he behaves?
I mean, we've had so many pivot points that we've gone in circles, right? I mean, he's not going to change how he behaves. I think that we have that. Let me rephrase that. I think it's very, very unlikely that he is going to change how he behaves. I cannot see this being what gets it done. If anything, he takes things that are perceived victories for him as confirmation that his approach worked. So I don't see why he would change how he's doing things from this. This bill, we've got to be really clear about this. The main reason this bill got done, I realize that there are a lot of victory laps being taken by various people at the White House, and to be sure, the president should feel happy that this is major legislation that got through. Whether it's a problem for Republicans down the road, I don't know. But Republicans on Capitol Hill acted out of essentially fear and self-preservation. They needed to have something done so they could go into the midterms saying, look what we did. That's the main reason this got done.
Because the president, in some ways, is away. They need something independent of him, even though he needs to sign it. One of the things we often see before the end of the year is a news conference, right? It's very possible the president will answer questions before the press in a very public way. This could be interesting this time. I mean, there's a whole lot of Russia to ask about. There's a whole lot of Roy Moore you could ask about. There's a whole lot of sexual harassment stuff to ask about here. I'm very curious to see how he handles that.
I think that he will probably, if he does do it, I think that he will probably handle it the way we have seen him handle similar lengthy news conferences. Remember, there was that one that he did very early on against his aide's advice, where he took questions for almost an hour. He loved it. It felt to him like a venting session. I think some of what he does here will depend on where things are with this investigation and how much he is buying into the strategy that his legal advisors have prescribed at this point.
Maggie Haberman, great to see you. You just set a date. We have to get back together in February to talk about who's still
and not a
in the
moment
administration.
before then. That's when we'll do it.
Fine. We're taking a break, Maggie and me. Thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it. Up next, new details in that deadly train derailment in Washington State. Today, we now know how much the train was speeding when it hit that curve, but there are still many safety questions that don't have answers. That's the latest next.